We are born, we listen to podcasts, we make podcasts of our own, and then we are gone. All anyone can hope for is to be remembered 2 podcasts deep.
Deep. Deep words.
This is your first podcast, by the way. You have 1 more to go.
Oh, you're right. You finished the race.
I have finished the race. I am 2, I would say more than 2.
Yes,
I'm
I will be
2+
forgotten
podcast
at this
deep.
point.
Yeah.
I'm only 1 podcast
Yeah,
deep.
what's your name?
Hard to say. All right, welcome to Science Fiction Book Club, a podcast for bookworms and stargazers alike. In every episode, we dive into the pages of our favorite science fiction novels to break down the big ideas, ask the nerdy questions, and maybe, just maybe, learn a little bit about ourselves along the way. I'm Obsa, and with me is my host, Abu.
So great to be back in the silo together.
Oh, yes.
In the silo of the studio space.
That's right.
Trapped. Someone let us out, please.
We're just crawling our ways out. Desperate we are.
I am excited. I'm excited
Yes.
to continue our read of Wool by Hugh Howey.
That's right.
I think before we get ahead of ourselves and start cracking too many silo jokes, let's take care of some housekeeping.
Let's do it.
Starting, of course, with our spoiler warning. Today, as the title implies, we will be talking about Wool chapters 18 to 52. So make sure that you have read those chapters and that you have watched Silo, the TV show on Apple TV Plus, season 1.
Yep.
Because you and I have already watched it and talked about it. We will be spoiling those things today.
That's right. As always, we, of course, encourage you, please do read along. Share your thoughts. Email us at sci-fi-bookclubpod@loreparty.com and join our Patreon at patreon.com/sci-fi-bookclubpod.
Yes.
We've got free reading guides, discussion questions, bonus clips, bloopers, all the good stuff. And it's also where you will find our Discord, where we like to keep this nerdy sci-fi discussion going. So please do join. And of course, you'll find all those links in the show notes.
That's right. Okay, housekeeping out of the way. Here is the game plan for today's episode. As always, we will begin by summarizing today's reading. Again, that's chapters 18 through 52 of Wool by Hugh Howey. Then we will share our impressions so far in the book, potentially predictions of what might happen in the final third of the book coming up,
That's right.
before wrapping up with a deep dive discussion in our sci-fi analysis. A couple of takeaways that both of us wanted to get into a little deeper today.
All right, let's take a quick break and we'll get into today's reading.
This episode is brought to you by Etsy.
Oh.
Hear that?
Okay, thank you.
Etsy knows these aren't the sounds of holiday gifting. Well, not the ones you're hoping for. You want squeals of delight, happy tears,
How did you?
and spontaneously written songs of joy.
I am so happy. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, the song needs a bit of work, but anyway, to get those reactions, make sure everyone on your list feels heard with handmade, handpicked, and designed gifts from small shops on Etsy. Gifts like personalized jewelry, custom artwork, cozy style items, vintage pieces, and home decor to celebrate all of your favorite people and their specific kind of special. For original gifts that say, I get you, Etsy has it.
All right, folks, welcome back. Let's get into it. Let's get into our summary of parts 3 and parts 4 of this book. Part 3 opens up with Juliet confined to a jail cell, and she's contemplating her fate, and she's thinking back on the days leading up to this moment and how she got here. This is, essentially serving as a bit of a recap of Juliet's, shall we say, extraordinarily short tenure
Yeah, you could say that
as
again.
Silo Sheriff. Mere days,
Days,
as we will
apparently.
come to learn.
Yeah.
And then in the next chapters for the rest of part 3, we essentially just flash back to those couple of days leading up to the point of her confined in the jail cell. So early on, Juliet encounters the head of IT, now the acting interim mayor.
That's right.
Bernard, our guy, our cackling guy, Bernard. He is immediately giving her bad vibes.
Yeah.
It's not a good meeting or relationship between the two of them. He pretty transparently appears to be really intent on covering up or at least brushing aside Mayor Johns' death.
Yes.
It's fine. It happened. Poison in a bottle.
People die.
People die all the time. There's no reason to investigate this.
Right.
Are you investigating this?
Right.
Any
Right.
suspects?
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty transparent stuff.
Yeah.
Now, soon after, another tragedy immediately strikes. Marnes, Deputy Marnes, who has been heartbroken by the death of his secret lover, Mayor Johns. Marnes himself is found dead in an apparent suicide. And Juliet is starting to get a little bit suspicious at this point.
Yeah.
She's not so certain that Marnes was the type of person to die by suicide in this way. He was certainly heartbroken, and she certainly goes through the grieving process, wondering how she didn't see the signs of maybe something was wrong with him. But it is mighty suspicious that so many back-to-back deaths are happening to people who were closely connected to each other.
Yeah.
Almost as if there's a conspiracy led by someone who has lots to gain. It's all very unusual.
Yeah.
Continuing on. While all of this sheriff work has been happening, in her personal life, Juliet meets this young, very handsome man named Lucas, who's always in the dining hall at night, super late at night after the lights are out, just staring at the view screen.
Right.
And she doesn't know what's up with him until she finally approaches him one night and they chat, and he reveals to her that he has been charting the stars outside. Right. It's clear that there's some mutual attraction here. Juliet turns into like a giddy schoolgirl around Lucas. And Lucas seems to like be pretty forward with Juliet, as we will come to see. There's some attraction here. Continuing with our summary, Juliet digs deeper into the mysterious deaths that have been going on. She's also looking into the files provided by one of her friends, Scotty, who works in IT, a former shadow of hers. He has provided her with files of everything Holston ever did on his personal computer.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Yeah.
Wild. It literally says like every folder, every keystroke, every click,
the logs
every
of everything.
log
I'm like, what?
Incredible stuff.
Yeah.
Where's this data being stored? Right. Regardless, he gets it, and she has been digging through everything Holston ever did to basically try to understand the man whose shoes she is trying to fill. Eventually, Scotty summons Juliet. When Juliet finds some like coded stuff in the files, and she shoots it off to Knox, who's a giant idiot. I don't know why Knox is supposed to help her with anything.
What was her thinking there? Yeah.
But Knox forwards it to Scotty. Scotty's like, "Oh my God, come to my office right now. Don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
Did anyone follow you?"
Right.
He's panicking.
Yes.
Scotty's like, "You should not have discovered this stuff. I can't believe I discovered this stuff. What the fuck?"
Right.
And he reveals the same thing that Allison had revealed to Holston in the first chapter, that on the servers, a secret program exists that can generate lifelike imagery on screens.
Right.
And so can any of the screens in our lives, notably the screen that shows us the outside world, can it be trusted?
Right. Right.
Who would need a program like this?
Right.
What is it being used for?
Right.
It raises all of the same questions it did for Allison. And it certainly makes Juliet much more suspicious of everything going on in the silo.
100%.
Now. She's clearly now entering the same mindset that Allison and Holston before her were in.
Totally.
Now, another death, Opsa, believe it or not. And this one is tragic. This one truly feels like a step too far by the conspiracy, aka Bernard. Scotty. Also, death by suicide.
Another death by suicide.
Apparently.
Yeah.
And now it's just like, this is a one-trick pony. Now it's getting really suspicious why so many people back to back are dying by suicide.
Yeah.
This is unprecedented.
Right.
And Juliet obviously heartbroken, but continues to be more and more suspect of what's going on. And adding to all of this, Peter gets a message that he must immediately arrest Juliet herself.
Oh my God.
What?
Yeah.
Bernard eventually explains, like, you know, whatever, like, we hit you with these like fake trumped up charges for like bursting into IT unannounced and without a scheduling a meeting.
Right.
Because I don't want you as sheriff.
Yeah. Ultimately, that's what it boils down to.
It just boils down to like, go down to the down deep.
Yes.
I want you out of here.
Yeah.
I want my man, Peter Billings, who I control and reports to me, to be in this role. And this was just a power play on his part to get Juliet out of the way. And that is what happens. Juliet gives up the gig. She returns to the down deep and reunites with, frankly, you know, a team and a family that she's much more comfortable with. And she doesn't feel so fish out of water down here as she did in her 3 days as sheriff, I think.
Yeah, I think by like hour 2 in the down deep, she's already working. Like, she's
back to the grind.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It clearly feels much more comfortable down here. She's back to the grind. Now, while here in the down deep, Juliet discovers a final, more cryptic message from Scotty.
Right.
And so she takes it to clearly someone who's sort of a mentor and stand-in father figure for her, Walker. She goes to Walker, and the two of them basically crack the case of a part of this conspiracy. Yeah. The suits that IT makes to send people out into the wild are designed to fail. The heat tape is designed to fail after a certain amount of time out there. And all of this is intentional. Everyone is sent out on purpose to clean and then immediately die. Right. None of the suits will actually ever let them survive further than the hill upon which Holston and his wife and every other cleaner has always died. We are told that Juliet comes up with some sort of plan of action here.
It's really a short-lived moment, but yeah, she hatches a plan of some sort. Yes.
And she's convinced she's about to change the silo forever.
Totally.
Maybe she's going to go public with this or something.
Right.
We don't know
those details.
And we don't find out, at least in part 3 and part 4, because
we do not.
Juliet is once again arrested. More charges against her.
Yeah.
This time they charge her with like all the Holston files that she clearly illegally had thanks to Scotty. Right. They charge her somehow with Scotty's death also.
I guess, yeah.
You know, Bernard is just outright wants to get rid of Juliet and
Simple
clearly
as.
wants to send her outside to clean.
Simple as.
And that's where we kind of loop full circle back to the start of part 3 where Juliet is in the jail cell and she is awaiting her own cleaning and her own walk of death, much like Holston and Allison before her. Okay, to wrap up part 3, Juliet gets a message from Walker, another cryptic message that says they're good in supply.
Right.
And we will obviously in part 4 come to learn she means I got you the good tape from supply, baby. We're good.
That good.
You're going to survive out there.
Right.
And that's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
Juliet gears up, is sent out to clean. In the final chapter of part 3, we switch perspectives to Bernard, who's like chomping on popcorn and like happily, greedily watching Juliet's cleaning take place. He's enjoying himself. He's ready to watch her die and all his problems go away.
Right.
And then that doesn't happen because Juliet does the thing that I and frankly everyone would do in this situation. She says, fuck all of you, walks away, doesn't clean a thing, and disappears over the hill.
Yes.
Something that's never happened, and the suits are designed to not allow to happen.
Yes.
What the fuck is going on? Bernard panics. He rushes to some secret area in the servers in the back. He uses some secret IT key to open a secret hidey hole.
Right.
And dials a secret, like, red phone, I assume.
Yes.
And the part 3 ends on a cryptic message of him communicating with Silo 1 and saying the words, "This is Silo 18. We have a problem."
All right. Pretty epic ending, I have to say.
Great
Part
ending.
3, pretty epic ending.
Great ending.
Yes.
So juicy, so good.
Yeah.
That was certainly a great way to wrap up part 3 for sure.
Good payoff there. Got to give it to our boy Hugh Howey.
Hugh Howey, well done.
All right.
And I will say part 3 is precisely where season 1 of Silo ends.
Yes, that's right.
Juliet going out,
that's right.
Not cleaning, disappearing above the curve of the hill.
Yes.
And the big reveal that many silos exist.
Right. All right, let's jump into part 4. So part 4 kicks us off with, I have to say, yet another flashback.
Oh,
This time to some of Juliet's happier childhood memories, where we
yes.
learn the origin of her name, a play called The Tragic History of Romeo and Juliet, which in my research I found was not the Shakespearean play, but in fact predated it. In any case, the rest of this section, part 4, unfolds through the alternating perspectives of Juliet, Lucas, and Knox. So picking up from the end of part 3, we watch Juliet as she does the incredible thing of rejecting the cleaning, and then she begins to venture further than any cleaner before her.
Yeah.
And of course, we see her make the startling discovery that there is another silo. In fact, very close by.
Right next door.
She thought she had to like march off into the city way off in yonder distance. And no, it was like 100 meters. And then there was a totally inhabitable silo.
Yep.
Just on the other side of the hill. So we of course follow Juliet into this new silo where she eventually encounters its sole remaining inhabitant.
Yes.
Who we know as Solo.
Mm-hmm.
Solo is... I have so much to say about him.
Yeah.
I'll have to
fascinating character.
hold off. Fascinating character. And just the concept of being in a silo for 34 years on his own, as we learn, just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And yes, their initial encounter is terrifying. He's chasing her. She's chasing him. There's a bit of confusion there.
Horrifying.
Eventually, we find that he's harmless, and not only harmless, but in fact quite helpful, as he offers Juliet what end up being totally mind-blowing truths to her about her world, you know, from the size of the silos and the surrounding world to the bloody history of what happened in that silo, and the fact that the silos are in fact interconnected, as there is power that the silo gets from another silo nearby.
Right. And that they communicate.
And that they, in fact, can communicate with one another. Meanwhile, back in Silo 18, we shift to Lucas's perspective, as Bernard is now attempting to recruit him as his shadow, which is interesting.
Okay.
He's certainly puzzled because he's like a grown
As am
adult,
I.
and he's like, I already have a job?
What?
I'm going to become your intern now? So he's as
Unpaid, Bernard?
I'm going to be your unpaid intern?
That's the most evil thing you'd ever do, you know?
Exactly. So truly despotic, strange moment. And but Bernard continues to reveal more and more to him about some of the truths and secrets underpinning their society. However, he is soon commanded to prepare for war, which, horrifying. And it seems to be the scripted response to Juliet's botched cleaning. And incredibly, Lucas complies and arms himself.
No questions.
No questions. And it's, I think, the very next scene that we see him that he's strapped. He's got arms.
It blows McClane the fuck up.
I mean, it's tragic, and also,
but also
very
confounding.
Quickly.
Like,
extraordinarily quickly.
Yes.
In any case, as these events are unfolding, we see the tensions in Mechanical rise as everybody is perplexed and extremely frustrated about what happened to Juliet, and their anger finds a focal point when Walker arrives for the first time ever, leaving his workshop.
Yeah. Really cool scene, to be fair.
Totally.
Yeah, really powerful stuff.
Absolutely. He's clearly agoraphobic, and everybody is shocked to see him.
Yeah.
And he reveals that it was, in fact, he who helped Juliet survive the cleaning. There had been a little bit of, gossip and rumors that maybe IT had resolved the tape issue, had kind of figure out how we can clean. But in fact, the truth was that IT continues to sabotage efforts to clean and to escape the silo. At which point, Knox gets on a pedestal and immediately is able to rally Mechanical and then eventually Supply as well to go and confront IT.
Yeah. With guns.
With guns. And bombs, let's not forget.
Bombs.
Yeah. And of course, we see what happens. The armed dissenters arrive at the upper levels. Very brief, for some reason, firefight ensues with gunfire, explosions, and, of course, casualties on both sides. In these concluding moments of Part 4, IT looks like they have successfully, to some extent, fended off the attack from Knox's group.
Yes.
But just when Bernard thinks that the crisis might be over, he receives an unexpected alert from another silo. And to his horror, the voice on the other end
He gets a Slack
belongs
message.
to, that's right.
A horrifying Slack
that
message.
red dot. Oh, God. And the voice on the other end belongs to none other than Juliet.
Let's go.
Radiating vengeance. And we end the section with her epic final words to him. I'm coming for you. I'm coming home, and I'm coming to clean.
Oh my God.
And
I have a
scene.
certain set of skills. She's giving Liam Neeson.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that is our summary of chapters 18 through 52, parts
That's right.
3 and 4
That's right.
of Wool.
A lot of thoughts, Obsa. Truthfully speaking, a lot of
Yes.
thoughts. Not all of them good.
Mixed, perhaps.
Mixed feelings,
Yeah.
certainly.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it. Yeah, let's talk. What are your impressions so far?
Okay. So far, truthfully speaking, I am having a difficult time deciding how I feel about this book. I am quite torn.
Yeah.
There are moments that are deeply compelling. There are scenes that I find incredibly enjoyable to read. There are characters I absolutely love. Juliet, for one,
Of course.
love so much.
Absolutely.
Such a strong character. Can't help but root for her. I'm also really sold on just like the overarching premise of the book.
Yeah.
You know, just this
Totally.
idea of post-apocalyptic humanity living in a silo. What happened? How did we
Yes.
end up here? How
Yes.
are we surviving?
Yeah.
The larger than life questions about this scenario, I'm super fascinated
Totally.
by. So the premise of the book, I'm still fascinated by. I'm still hungry to get answers here.
Yes.
I want to keep reading in order to learn the truth about the silo,
Yeah.
the truth about Bernard and the conspiracy, the truth about the other side, you know, all of these questions
Yeah.
that are being asked
Yeah.
by Allison and then Holston and now Juliet and now presumably Lucas.
Yes.
And I'm right there with the characters
Yeah.
in wanting to learn the truth of this world. That having been said, I have an increasingly long list of issues as we continue reading.
Yeah.
The problems you and I had talked about in the previous episode, in the first 18 chapters, in the first 17 chapters, they aren't getting better. And in many ways, they're getting worse. The pacing, I found the beginning of the book to be quite fast and enjoyable. Here in the middle, in this long section, I found the pacing to be incredibly uneven.
Bit of a slog at times. Yeah.
Like, and it's, to your point, like even in your summary, you were mentioning it, like Lucas, there are incredibly slow chapters where he's doing like nothing but being sad about a girl he just met like 2 nights ago and going through her private things and finding what I think is a wedding ring from her former lover.
Right. Which he keeps.
Which he then keeps in
Which
his
he
pocket,
tucks
bro.
away. Yeah.
It's giving like simp incel behavior, man. Lucas.
Come on, sad boy. Yeah.
It's very much giving sad boy behavior
Yeah.
for sure. There's that, and then there's him strapped in the middle of a firefight,
Right.
killing McLean, blowing up.
Right.
Like the pacing is so weird.
Yeah.
There are incredibly slow parts where
Yes.
you're just like, come on, let's
Yes.
get to it.
Yeah.
And then it jumps so fast and fast forward.
Right. And it doesn't let certain scenes kind of breathe, and have a life of
Exactly.
their own. Yeah.
Right. Or we're missing any sort of transitional scene to
Right.
gear us up.
Right.
And I think I don't know, just thinking of it from a writing perspective, I think Hugh Howey is trying his best to build tension.
Yeah.
I think he very much succeeds in doing that with Juliet's chapters.
Yes.
This slow
Right.
crawl of survival and
Right.
death
Right.
into the silo, and then the really tense moment where
Yes.
we come across Solo for the first time.
Exactly.
Really great stuff.
Absolutely.
I couldn't wait to get back to
Totally.
Juliet.
Yes.
I fucking hate it every time we cut back to Knox.
Yeah.
The uprising is so cringe,
Yeah.
so hilariously quick and
just lackluster.
like lackluster and
Yeah.
like defies logic
Totally.
in so many ways.
Yeah.
Every time we cut back to Lucas, I was like, God damn it, I hate this guy. I don't want to read this stuff.
Yeah.
So really uneven for me here,
Yeah.
pacing wise, story structure wise. Juliet again continues to be incredible. Lucas, I mean, so much to say about him, but in summary, I think he's acting more as a plot device in this story rather than a character unto himself.
Right.
Like, we have no context of his relationship to Bernard. Why is he suddenly being handed the keys to the nuclear arsenal?
Right.
What?
Yeah. Yeah.
The president is just like giving the keys over to
There's
someone who we
no
don't
context.
like.
Yeah.
No context.
Yeah.
Is he Bernard's like second in command?
Right.
Does he work closely with
Right.
Bernard?
It is puzzling because there is one throwaway sentence where Lucas describes Bernard and he says his old friend, which is interesting.
Okay.
And he also, I think Bernard mentions knowing Lucas's parents or his father, perhaps,
I
or
do
something,
recall that.
something along those lines. But that is literally one sentence. There is no explanation or justification, or, I mean, even just in those moments, it's like, okay, wait, so is he a friend? Is he like an adult mentor? That was your parents'
coworker?
friend? Like, I'm so confused.
Is it your manager?
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
What is he to you?
Right.
And honestly, like, as we are talking about it, I got nothing out of the Juliet childhood flashback to the play and the origin of her name.
Literally nothing.
I rather would have had a Lucas flashback
Yes.
that explains his relationship to Bernard.
Yes, yeah. Maybe anything that would have also humanized Bernard a little bit so that he wasn't so one-sided.
Right.
you
Like
know?
Lucas's instant trust of Bernard to go into the secret closet.
Yes.
Like, what?
Right.
If my manager was like, come to the back with
Right.
me, I'd be like, no, actually, I'm going to go to HR.
Right.
Like,
right.
There's no explanation
Defies
of that
logic.
relationship.
Yeah,
It defies
totally.
logic,
Yeah.
and Lucas is just there to like get us more to the mysteries of the Asylum
Right.
in a way.
Right.
And it's like, it's like, I don't know, I might be wrong here, but to me, it's clearly being telegraphed that Bernard's going to fucking die,
Right.
and
right.
Lucas will inherit the like
Right.
future of the
Right.
Asylum somehow.
Oh, okay.
At
All
least
right, we do
that's
have
the
a little prediction
telegraphing
here.
that I'm
Okay,
getting. Yeah,
I like that's a good prediction.
Right.
You know,
And again, I'm saying that
Yeah.
not having watched season 2
Sure,
of Silo,
totally,
we don't know what's going to
Yeah, yeah,
happen. We're in the book, we're officially past the TV show.
Right.
So I don't know what's going to happen in part
Right,
5 of the book.
right. But to your point, that is something that Hugh Howey, I have noticed, has done. You know, like even in the foreshadowing of Mayor John's death, there were pretty explicit remarks that kind of hinted at that. So I think that's a pretty plausible theory, in fact, because he does talk about the fact that he needs a successor.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, are
If
you
something were to
telling
happen
us?
to me.
Yeah. Good point. That's good catch there. Yeah.
So but again, that makes Lucas such a weak, like weird character. Like it's hard to even call him a character. He's just there as a plot device for Juliet, now for Bernard, now for this.
Right.
So I'm not a fan of Juliet. Excuse me, I'm not a fan of Lucas at all.
Right.
One more thing I wanted to touch on that I'm not going to harp too much on. We talked about it in the last episode. The romance continues to be incredibly cringy.
God,
it gets no better.
It gets no
between
better.
Juliet and Lucas than it was between Marnes and Mayor Johns.
Yeah.
In fact, it gets worse. I think it detracts from Juliet's character in many instances where she goes weak in the knees around this guy. Like,
exactly.
are you kidding?
Yeah.
Like, Juliet is such a badass character.
Totally.
And you're telling me she sees like this hot 24-year-old guy and is like, oh my God, I'm a little schoolgirl. I'm getting giddy. I don't know what to say to him.
Also,
It's
in
out of
the
character.
midst of several deaths,
Several murders!
that she's investigating,
Juliet, do your job!
of close friends and people that she has had contact with, it's just not very
wild.
sensible that this person is
and again,
going giddy for.
The TV show handles
Yeah.
this so much better.
Totally.
Because after Marnes's admittedly tragic death,
True.
after the other deaths that Juliet witnesses, who does she call on the TV show? Walker.
Right.
She radios down to Walker
Right.
and her friends in the down deep
Right.
for support and
Yes.
help.
Yep.
And not some fucking guy named Lucas she just met.
Yeah. Pretty bizarre.
And you know what? Here's what I'll say about the TV show also. We're already on the topic of the TV show. I have
Can't
this
escape it.
Can't escape
Can't
it.
escape
I
it.
can't escape it. I
Yeah.
have it in my notes here. The circle that I am having a hard time squaring so far in our read through of this book is how the TV show is affecting my perception of the book.
Yeah.
Because I'm just going to say it. I kind of like tap danced around this in the last episode. I'm just going to, at this point, I'm ready to outright just say it. the TV show is clearly a superior product in many ways, in character, in story, in world building,
pacing.
in pacing. The TV show is like much more logical and nuanced with all of this, like timing, for example.
Yeah.
We mentioned Juliet is sheriff for like 3 days in the book. How did all of this take place in 3 days?
Yeah.
In the show, it happens over weeks, which is much more logical.
Right,
It also gives breathing room to build out characters like Peter Billings,
Yes.
who is so fascinating in the show. He was one of my favorite characters in our discussion.
Yeah, totally.
He gets like 3 things to do and say in this book.
Yeah.
Is he ever going to come back?
Exactly.
Who knows?
Even the secretary in the
show
show
is
is so much more personable and real and just has more weight than a lot of the ones that we encounter, unfortunately.
And it's much more logical and natural too. Like, why is everyone in the up top so nice to Juliet in the book?
Right.
Like Pam is bringing her soup and stuff to eat. In the TV show, the secretary is like mad at Juliet. She's like, who the fuck are you? Some down deep girl I've never met? Like, why should I trust you?
Right.
You're not qualified for this job also, first of all. So it's like a little illogical how it happens, which again, maybe I'm only thinking of because the show handles it so much more logically that I can't help but notice the plot hole in the book. I will say, I am very interested in examining my feelings moving forward now that we have surpassed the TV show. I don't know. Will my list of criticisms continue to bother me here? Will part 5 redeem itself in some way? Will the like baggage of the show disappear and I can just enjoy part 5 for what it is in the book without comparing it to something? I don't know if that will change my feelings, but I'm interested in examining that as we continue to the end of this book here.
Yeah, I would have to agree.
Okay, this is getting long-winded, but clearly I'm passionate about some of these things. One final thing I'll say, and then I do want to hand the mic to you. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. There's one criticism I want to mention here at the end that I don't think part 5 will just magically fix. I hate to say this because I can never imagine writing a book myself, but Hugh Howey's feels like a frustratingly inconsistent writer.
Right.
And again, this is one of his earliest works. We talked in the last episode how this is a self-publishing journey.
Yeah, and how it came about.
He released it in parts. There are many reasons why this would be a little clunky as an author's first big outing. So you have to be a little forgiving there.
Totally.
And I'm certainly trying to be. But it's just frustrating to me as a pretty well-versed sci-fi reader to read a sci-fi story that still is feeling so surface level. Like the story is grasping at these like bigger themes.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's potentially great stuff in there. Like there's commentary on class and status and the nature of like freedom and oppression.
Yes.
Really cool stuff that it could be digging into. Yeah. But it only ever sort of brushes against these ideas and then quickly moves on. Yeah. We only get the most cursory commentary on this stuff. Right. I have a couple of examples I wanted to share here. I pulled some quotes. Knox's rebellion, which really bothered me. It's just kind of like hilariously fast and ferocious. Yeah. The response is crazy. Like we're manufacturing guns to take down a bunch of computer fucking nerds in IT. Yep. It's crazy. Why are we arming for war? But we get this like look into Knox's mentality during the uprising. That's just so simplistic. Quote, had he become the bad people he'd learned about in youth? Or had he been lied to? It hurt his head to consider, but here he was leading a revolution. And yet it felt so right, so necessary. What if that former clash had felt the same? Had felt the same in the breasts of the men and women who'd waged it. End quote.
Oh my.
Knox, what?
Yeah.
Like, are you just now realizing that people rebel because they're angry and passionate about something, and now you're angry and passionate about something?
Oh, careful, my brain. It hurts.
It's like, that's clunky. Yeah. And I wish it wasn't. Like, I get like Knox is not the most like, he's not the like sharpest diamond in the rough here.
But he also is the foreman of mechanical, right?
He's in charge of mechanical. Like
they ensure the survival of the silo day in, day out, you know?
Yeah, that's such a great point.
He did have to rise to the point of foreman. Why is he such an ignoramus, you know?
Yeah, you'd imagine he's in charge of many moving pieces and parts.
Very complicated things, yeah.
And he would be, yeah. And like charisma is not the only thing that gets you to that position in the down deep, presumably, based on what we've been told.
Yes.
So, yeah, it just, again, we're brushing up against this like very simplistic take on oppression and why people rise up against authority, where we could be exploring things much further. We could be looking at like the deeper causes of uprisings, the types of oppression that push people to do abominable acts, you know, that push people to manufacture guns and wage war.
Yeah.
Like there's so much commentary to be made there, so many parallels to be drawn to like the war on terror and many conflicts around the world. And we, you know, none of that nuance is ever touched on.
Yeah.
It's very basic stuff here, which is disappointing to me. At the same time, Howey also, like speaking to his inconsistency as a writer here, he also writes stuff that like genuinely I find to be really beautiful.
Yes.
There's beautiful passages in here that I feel are poignant and resonate with me. One I wanted to share was this beautiful piece of writing during Marnes's funeral, for example. Quote, "We are born, we are shadows, we cast shadows of our own, and then we are gone. All anyone can hope for is to be remembered to shadows deep."
Yeah.
End quote.
That
really struck me.
Yeah.
That's such a beautiful sentiment. I mean, even the idea of like shadows as a concept in a place where the sun never shines is really fascinating to me. Does it go that deep? I don't know if that's what Hugh Howey was going for, but I really love this sentiment of like the silo exists and continues to exist if you can pass on your skills and knowledge to somebody after you.
Right.
And that is how we as a species continue, is by nurturing the next generation.
Right.
It's a really cool glimpse into the society.
Totally.
It's a really beautiful and poignant bit of commentary on just like death and legacy and passing on knowledge and, you know, sort of generational growth and being able to step aside when your time has come and let someone else take over. Like really beautiful stuff there.
Totally.
And so and that to me is so funny that both of these ideas are in the same fucking book, like mere chapters apart.
Yeah.
That
by the same author.
The same author. And so again, like Hugh Howey's got the juice. Totally. It's in there somewhere.
Right.
But it's like really diluted by like really basic takes.
Sure.
On some of the commentary that I was hoping to get deeper stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my really long-winded rant and takes on the book so far. I'm curious to hear how you're feeling.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely share a lot of the perspectives that you covered there. I think, I think let's if we take a moment and just like frame these two parts of the book that we've got here. We've got murders.
Yes.
We've got chases. Explosions.
Boom.
Romance, unfortunately. But lots of it. And lots of crying, apparently.
Lots of crying, yeah.
Which, you know, I was saying this just before we started recording, but I think nearly every other chapter, one of the characters is just openly weeping, which, you know, great. Let's be emotionally mature. Totally love that.
Yeah.
But also, there are other ways of expressing sentiment, pathos, you know, pain, suffering than the ways that we encounter in this book. But let me start with the good.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think Hugh Howey continues in these sections to excel in crafting a world that is deeply visual, deeply sensorially interesting. You know, we've got the depiction of Juliet's exploration of the outside, which I found to be super vivid. You can basically feel the desolation of the barren world that she's exploring. You can visualize her pushing past the broken and hollow bodies and tattered remains, as he describes them.
That was great stuff.
You can smell the decay in the new silo. We come across this phrase that I just couldn't get past, a mist of powdered flesh, which
that was a bad time for me to take a sip of my drink.
But I think it perfectly captures, you know, that kind of graphic and immersive quality in his writing. And to your point, does speak to his strengths as a writer. I mean, he absolutely has these moments throughout the book where you are, you know, enthralled by the world that he's painting. that said, I also did find these sections to be rather overlong.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is kind of undeniable, I think. But there are still a few standout moments. In particular, for me, it was certainly the dramatic chase and the encounter with Solo. That was fascinating.
So good.
He, as a character, I am really eager and hoping we'll get to see, a rendition of in the Apple adaptation.
Yes.
Almost regardless of who they cast for it. I just think this, really, tragic backstory and the 34-year isolation, just kind of another element that adds a really rich narrative vein that I will say I wish had been explored even further.
Yeah.
And instead we got a lot of other exposition and ultimately a rebellion, from the perspective of Knox and the residents of the silo that kind of fizzles out, unfortunately, and is a little bit weaker. But I think on that note of parts that I did like less, what's most obvious for me is how much the book struggles with just repetitive plot elements. As I noted, we've got murders, we've got suicides and explosions, and I don't know, after the third mysterious death, the eighth teary-eyed scene, the emotional resonance is just not there. It's basically non-existent. Ultimately, if everything is tragic, nothing is tragic. Like that is, I hate to say it, but I started to feel a little bit of emotional distance from the characters and some of the drama unfolding because it felt like I had just experienced a death 2 pages ago. Which is a little bit tough. And I think you already spoke to the weakness of the romantic subplots, which yes, continue to feel forced and cringy. The whole infatuation that Lucas has with Juliet, it feels quite juvenile, unfortunately, rather than particularly endearing. And also, we don't talk much about it in this episode, besides, I guess, right now, Bernard fesses up in a kind of a throwaway line that he murdered somebody in the Down Deep. Which, what? Like, that feels like a pretty big deal. And
Oh my God.
maybe I don't know, and maybe exploring or expanding on that, maybe a little bit of Bernard's choices today would make a little bit more sense. But you have to think, if somebody has committed murder and gotten away with it, presumably they've become more sophisticated and less just obviously villainous,
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
which is a little puzzling.
Yeah.
But
I think Bernard as a character is extremely disappointing as a villain, as an antagonist, because you said it earlier, we're never given, in all of these chapters, in all of these flashbacks, we're never given any reason to humanize Bernard in any way.
no, not at all, unfortunately.
He's just this cackling, buck-toothed, nerdy motherfucker who's clearly plotting.
Yes.
At what point he even says I've come to the decision that there could be no better mayor than me.
Right.
And you're like, who the fuck is voting for this guy?
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and it also, I will say, it does a disservice to Lucas as well, because there is it's clear that Lucas has been persuaded by something that Bernard revealed to him, whether it's the expanded pact and the kind of conjoined order that they have, or something about, how he conveyed their mission and keeping the silo alive against, threats, mostly internal, it seems. But because of our, at this point, pretty, I think, universal dislike of Bernard, it's hard to justify Lucas's actions as being at all justified. It's hard to imagine that there was something that the evil villain Bernard presented to him that suddenly made a light bulb go off, and all of this seemed to make sense. Right. So I think there's a little bit of kind of disservice done to Lucas even with the depiction of Bernard. Yes. Which is a little unfortunate. Yeah. But of course, there's still a lot of book left. I am sure that our opinions and perspectives will continue to evolve.
Yes.
I am certainly still invested in the book. As you said, we still have some open loops that we want to close. And I'm certainly looking forward to seeing how the book concludes.
Yeah. I'm in the same boat. Yeah. I mean, this has been a lot of critical talk, of course. And I think we criticize from a place of love. Like
Totally.
we love sci-fi as a
Yes.
genre. We love storytelling, and it would be a disservice on our part to the book to just kind of whitewash over like, oh, well, this part kind of sucked, but
Yeah.
let's not talk about it. I think like our criticisms are genuine. They come from a place of loving stories like this.
Yeah.
And wanting more of the book.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I'm in the same boat. I truly hope that part 5 captures me. I
Yeah.
hope we close some of those loops.
Yes.
I will be incredibly disappointed if we don't close a lot of the loops, and then I go online or somebody in the Discord is like, sorry, boo, you got to read the fucking sequel to get answers to stuff.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to. I'm just going to Wikipedia that shit. Nothing irks me more
Yeah.
than when a book intentionally is like, I'm going to write more books
Yeah.
here, so you're not getting any answers
Yeah.
yet,
Yeah.
and doesn't at least close its own internal loops
Right.
in that story
Right.
that it's
Right.
telling. So
Right.
I'm a little bit worried that that's where we're headed, that like
Yeah.
part 5 is going to continue sort of like
Teasing us.
teasing
Yeah.
constantly, like
Yeah.
blue balling us.
Right.
Like there is this repetitive tendency Hugh Howey had in these sections in part 3 and part
Yeah.
4 to end every chapter on
On
a
a
cliffhanger.
cliffhanger. Yes.
And you said it beautifully
Yeah.
earlier. If everything is tragic, nothing is tragic.
Right.
If everything is a cliffhanger, bro, I'm not hanging
There's
on this
no
cliff
suspense.
anymore.
Yeah,
There's no
totally.
suspense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So like, there's a couple of like amateurish mistakes
Yeah.
here in the writing
Yeah.
that are just difficult as
Yes.
again as people who are well versed in this space and
Yeah.
have read legendary books in
Exactly.
this
Exactly.
world,
Yeah.
in this sci-fi world,
Yeah.
that reading something that's a little more simplistic, it
Yeah.
can be a bit frustrating.
And, in just further defense of Hugh Howey, we talked about how this book came together.
Yeah.
Obviously,
I
it started
mean-
out with, a very short story that was beloved. And then, like a madman, he powered through the rest
Powered.
of the book
Bang, bang,
in
bang, bang.
less than a year. So, I mean, kudos to him for turning this into a series of 3 books and now an Apple adaptation. And
He got his bag.
He got his bag.
Good
I
on
mean,
him, my guy.
I applaud it.
Yeah.
I absolutely
And
applaud it.
Here's the thing: like by its very nature of release, he had to jump on the hype train,
Yeah.
right? He like released part 1, it like accidentally blew up on the algorithms
Right.
and on Amazon,
Yeah.
and people were asking for part 2,
Yeah.
and he jumped on it. He was like, while the tide is rising,
Exactly.
I need to ride the wave,
Precisely.
and so he couldn't be like, I'm gonna take my time,
Yeah.
and you'll get part 2 next
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
That would kill any momentum
No.
he had.
Yes, exactly.
So again, like very sharp, like business and strategic choice on
Exactly.
his part
Yeah.
to just bang out the rest of this
Right,
book as
right,
fast as he
right,
could
right,
in
yeah.
the next couple of
Yeah.
months.
A slightly different approach than, say, George R. R. Martin, who I believe is still finishing that series of books.
That is a huge aside that I could go down about him never fucking finishing that book before he dies. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yes, I think all of our criticism has to be taken within the context
Totally.
of the reality in which this book was actually published.
Totally.
The very unique reality,
Exactly.
the nature of like having to ride that wave.
Yes.
Like Hugh Howey made a whole career out of
Totally.
this. Like
Yeah.
props, my guy.
Yes, 100%,
Incredible.
100%.
You rode that wave like
Yeah.
a genius
Totally.
to so much success.
Yeah.
And now he's, living off of dozens of books
Yeah.
he's written and bestsellers.
Yeah.
So
Also achieving your dreams. This was his
achieve-
dream.
it was his
He was
dream to write a
child-
book.
Yeah, and he did it.
So again, like all of our criticisms aside, like my guy did it.
Yeah, totally.
he really jumped on an opportunity.
Yeah.
And like, is wool high art that will be preserved in the MoMA or something? I don't think so.
Yeah.
But the fact that he flipped that shit into a career
Yeah.
and allowed himself time to maybe write his second and third and fourth, fifth, 10th book slowly and more maturely
Totally.
and grow as a writer.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Also, we got
Props.
Silo out of it, which is fantastic.
We got a fantastic
TV show out of it. And that is, maybe at the end of the day, that's good enough.
There's a lot of wins.
Yes, there's a lot of wins.
Like, despite the criticisms, there's
everybody
a lot of
needs
wins.
an editor. And I think a lot of writers and editors came together and turned his really fantastic gem of a book into a really high quality.
Like a high quality,
really high quality
home
sci-fi
run
series.
of a TV show.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay, well, that's our thoughts and impressions
Yes.
about this section of the book.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick breather, Opsa, because we are not done with today's conversation.
That's right.
We still want to dive a little bit deeper and pick at some themes and larger ideas in our takeaways. So, dear listener, don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Welcome back, listeners, and let's jump into our sci-fi analysis.
Yes.
Abu, why don't you take it away?
Okay, so for my takeaway, the big idea that I wanted to sit down together and discuss and pick apart a bit more is the luxury of imagination and how socioeconomic status here in the silo in the book, but also in real life, make that a privilege that not everyone gets. I think this is an idea that really is present with Juliet's story in particular. We know by this point in the book that there is a very clear class divide. You have the folks of the down deep,
Right.
and then you have the people in the mids, and then you have sort of the bureaucracy upperclassmen in the up top.
Yeah, pretty stratified.
Pretty stratified. And some of it feels just like society has just naturally become this way.
Yeah.
Some of this stratification, though, feels a bit intentional.
Yeah.
Given the conspiracy that we're clued in on by this
Right.
point. And in this reading in particular, we also learned that the other silo is designed just like this one.
Right.
So
right.
there's some sort of intentionality in
Right.
the design as well.
It's not accidental.
It's
Yeah.
not.
It's not organic by any means.
It's not organic. The
Yes.
silo didn't just come into being like
Right,
this,
right.
and mechanical just happened to be at the
Right,
bottom.
Right.
Or, the nursery happened to be in the middle or
Right.
something. Like, it was intentionally designed this
Yeah.
way. And so that does make you wonder, were the creators intentionally creating a stratified society in which the more quote unquote powerful, influential people would be at the top, with notably a view of the outside?
Right.
The down deep doesn't have
Right.
a view screen to the outside.
right.
Only the up toppers do.
Yeah.
So all of that certainly raises suspicions and questions for me about the socioeconomic status within the silo. This stratification, clearly, as we see in the uprising, leads to some strife within the communities. There's obviously, we talked about this in the last episode, there's obviously Bernard's like cartoonishly villainous hatred of people from the down deep, you know, those filthy people in the down deep,
the vermin,
the vermin they smell. That's obviously like a little ham-fisted. But McLean also observes to Knox when they are making their plan for the uprising that they likely won't have allies in the mids for their rebellion.
Right.
And then McLean says this quote I wanted to share that really kind of clues us in on how specifically the stratification and the tension between the different quote unquote class of people exists in the silo. McLean says, quote, "It's the mids, the people who aspire upward without knowing and who look down on us without compassion that will be the most reluctant." End quote.
Interesting.
Fascinating stuff.
Not what I would have guessed. Yeah. That's
People in the mids sound like assholes. Which notably, we don't meet a lot of people from the mids in this story. It's the up-toppers and the down-deepers.
Come to think of it, do we meet anybody from the mids? I guess Lucas lives technically in the mids.
But works in IT up top.
Yeah, that's right.
Clearly, there's a bit of like melding and there's traffic up and down. But the stratification is pretty clear.
Yes.
And if you're from the mids, you're from the mids.
Yes.
If you're part of the up top, you're part of the up top. And this clearly creates a society much like our own, right? Like McLean could practically be describing real world middle class, upper class, lower class, and, the middle class and upper middle class aspirations to reach that McMansion and get the cars and the 4-car garage and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It seems like that clearly exists in the silo in its own version as well. It's extra interesting, though, to consider, for me at least, this class stratification within the context of the silo, because these are people who have been cooped up for centuries.
Right.
These are people who are very tightly controlled
Yeah.
by some sort of conspiracy. These are people who are surviving, right? The idea of the shadows we talked about earlier. You pass on your shadow,
Yes.
this cultural norm that exists speaks to like a we're all in this together idea.
Right.
But it's interesting to me that perhaps Howey is observing through this story that no amount of conspiracies that control us, no amount of authoritarian control, no amount of post-apocalyptic need to survive
Yeah.
is actually going to completely erase this like very natural human instinct to break off into tribes,
Right.
to break off into classes, to create a us and them,
Right.
and then to try to climb the social ladder. That's also a very natural thing to be part of the better in group than your group. But also, McLean says they look down on us without compassion. That's also a natural human instinct to, no matter where you are in that ladder, to oppress the people beneath you, because that continues to reinforce your position that you're in now.
Right.
All of this is like very analogous stuff from
Yes.
the silo to the real world. This all happens in the real world in very explicit ways. But I think within the context of the silo, I find it extra interesting because perhaps Howey is just getting at this idea that this is human nature and there will not be a kumbaya moment where we all hold hands and work toward a singular goal.
That's interesting. I wonder what that might suggest for how this novel ends. Are we headed towards, I guess, more chaos and less unity? Is that the thing that's kind of being foreshadowed by this commentary, as you're kind of pointing out?
Right. And we're given one version of the chaos that might happen because look at what happened to Silo 17, the one next door.
Right.
The bodies.
Yeah.
The dusty flesh, as we said earlier.
Powdered flesh.
Powdered flesh.
That's right.
Yeah, and truly a horrifying scene, right?
Yeah.
Like that was a very visceral and visual scene for me.
Yeah.
We are given a vision of how things can go horribly
Right.
wrong.
Right.
And that perhaps how Bernard is trying to prevent that.
Yes. Right.
With his ironclad grip.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Like that's one vision we're told. We're also seemingly hinting at potentially more chaos here rather than less people joining up and more people waging war, which takes place. Which is dark. You know, that's a dark take. For this story, because I will say, like, yes, we've seen some deaths by suicide, but we haven't seen things that are like overtly dark in this story. I think, or at least things that would make me go like, "Ooh, a kid shouldn't read this."
Right.
You know, like, I say this because I've also been reading Parable of the Sower, which like,
cases for not being read by children.
No spoilers, but like that is not a book that even like a mature young child should be reading. Like Parable of the Sower is so dark, and so brutal. And the silo is not. At least this silo. Okay, returning to my takeaway and to wrap up the ideas here, we also get another real world truth in this silo. And that's the fact that class inequality creates this privilege of free time for those people who are usually more on the upper class side of things, right? People who have their basic needs taken care of, who are educated, who are surrounded by like-minded people, have the luxury of asking the more existential questions in this silo. The why are we here? The who made us? The what's going on outside? We have this screen we can look at what's out there versus everyone in mechanicals. Like, I've never really looked at the outside world in my life. And
why would I want to?
And why would I fucking want to? I got to turn this wrench 10 more times. So it's fascinating. And again, I think we see that clear class divide and the clear difference there between the types of questions people are asking I think in Mechanical, they're more offended that they've been lied to
Right.
rather than what's going on outside.
Right.
In the up top, people like Holston and Allison are like, we've been lied to. We got to get out there.
Right. Right.
There's a quote I wanted to share that kind of illustrates this. Like Mechanical, Juliet is thinking this, and she is thinking about how when she was down there in Mechanical, she never had time to think about these questions. Quote, what had seemed trivial when she lived in the down deep, where exhaust leaks could asphyxiate and broken flood pumps could drown everyone she knew, now loomed large before her. What was it all about, this life they lived in underground confines? What was out there over those hills? Why were they here and for what purpose?
Oof. Yeah.
End quote. So again, all of those big questions were trivial to her.
Right.
Because day to day, there were things to fix.
Yes.
There was life and death to contend with.
Yeah.
And presumably they're not getting paid the most down there. Whereas now that she's up here living this up-topper life,
No, she's racking in those chits.
she's got that big, huge sheriff paycheck.
That's right.
But also she's got this like free time now.
Yeah.
To just think about these things. She
Right.
can sit in the jail cell and like look out and stare at this world.
Right.
And ask questions she's never bothered to worry about
Right.
before. I think Lucas, returning to our guy Lucas,
Our boy Lucas.
I think he's a clear example of this.
Yeah.
Like, this motherfucker has a cushy job in IT, right?
Yeah.
He spends many of his nights, presumably, just staring up at the stars in the cafeteria. He gets promoted practically to CEO overnight.
That's
This
right.
guy's failing upwards.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, in my mind, this is like the most generic whitest dude of all whitest dudes. There's no way this happens to a person of color. But he's living this like up
Right.
topper life.
Right.
He lives in the mids, but he
Yeah.
works up top. He has that luxury and he can go out and wonder about the stars.
Yeah.
Knox, Shirley, Marcus, whoever down there, like none of those people are wondering about the stars. They don't
Yeah.
have time.
Yeah.
And I think, again, to kind of bring this home, this is all analogous to real world stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Totally.
This is very true in the real world. And it's a rare thing to be a part of that intellectual class. And I think in modern day life is actually quite unique in the fact that there is quite a large intellectual class. Whereas, you go back a few hundred years
Right.
and it's really like the aristocracy
Yeah.
that gets to read books
Right.
and have library
Right.
access
Right.
and ask big philosophical questions.
Right.
And your everyday peasant is just eking out an existence.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that the silo is approaching these ideas in a way that is analogous to real life. I think it's a kind of a dark take from Howey on how humanity would even exist in a post-apocalyptic world.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to like all of those thorny questions we were talking about last episode. In the face of extinction, like, does the end goal of survival justify any means here?
Right.
This class division seems to be imposed by the creation of the silo,
Yeah.
by the conspiracy and the authoritarian control of IT.
Yeah.
Is that necessary for
Right.
survival?
Right.
Someone clearly thought it was, or they wouldn't have made the silo this way, and they wouldn't have made a pact that says prepare for war when this happens.
Yes.
Someone thought, keep the classes divided, oppressed, and suppressed in
Right.
this way exactly
Right.
in order for us to survive. Is this the only way a silo can exist? Is my natural next question.
Yeah.
Is Silo 15 like a woke leftist utopian, kumbaya, like,
yeah.
Everyone is just like smoking
Yeah.
weed
Right.
and having abortions in Silo 15 over there?
Yeah.
Is this the only way a silo can continue to exist?
Yeah.
This very strict class division and authoritarian rule.
Yeah.
It brings me back to that question and the big whys and whos of it all.
Right.
Why are we here? Who chose this as
Yeah.
the path forward for humanity?
Yeah.
I'm dying to know answers to these questions, but I'm glad the book
Yeah.
is raising them.
Yeah, and you've got me now, just like reeling with the same questions.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating when you look at it through that lens because I agree that in this book, Hugh Howey does do a really great job of capturing a lot of the structures of the civilization that we're accustomed to
Yeah.
in a setting that is obviously quite dystopian, but more or less does kind of encapsulate a lot of the same dynamics that we experience in our own lives.
Yes.
And I think that that is actually, that's kind of a good segue to what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think you absolutely touched on it as well, and really boils down to this ever present, I think, universal conflict between chaos on the one hand and control on the other. Because we are clearly seeing in Wool a highly engineered society, one in which there is a degree of control that most dictators today would love to have over the lives of their citizens. Over their citizenry.
Gaddafi would be creaming his pants to be in Bernard's position.
Oh yeah, it's so it's interesting because there are clear and countless examples that demonstrate this dynamic between control and chaos. Obviously, we've got the superstructured societal order that figures like Bernard maintain, and we also have, on the other hand, unsanctioned relationships, which naturally emerge when authoritarian powers try to impose control over our natural human instincts.
Right. And which to some extent people are just like okay with.
Yeah.
Especially if it's like young.
Oh, totally.
love.
Exactly.
Right.
And we also have the risks that are associated with the possession of certain kinds of knowledge.
Yes.
So we see this attempt at kind of controlling not only, the bodies and the physical movements of people through the silo and the kind of stratification that you spoke to that reduces social mobility, because we don't really hear, with the exception, funny enough, of Juliet, of anybody moving from one part of the silo to the other. As the only people that we have doing that are the porters, and they are paid less than how much it costs to send an email, which, so I don't think they're experiencing the benefits of social mobility. I think they are just literally physically able to move up and down the silo, which we also know to be a pretty arduous thing, because there are some 100 odd levels that they have to traverse.
Yeah. Can you imagine those thighs and glutes?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Just steel. So there's a lot that speaks to creating, ultimately, I think stability is the aim with all these mechanisms of control. But beneath that veneer of stability, chaos simmers. It's very clear. The chaos simmers underneath in the silo, and we obviously see it erupt at times, such as in the rebellion, Knox's rebellion,
right?
And seemingly every rebellion that has come before that also. And for me, these uprisings essentially symbolize the organic and ultimately inevitable challenge that we end up raising against the imposed order. And it also kind of highlights the eternal struggle between, on the one hand, collective responsibility, which is epitomized by Bernard and Lucas as well, and the yearning for individual liberty. So I think naturally we're all drawn to one side more than the other on this particular question, which is to me what makes this book feel like it has more stakes, If it really just boiled down to the mystery of the conspiracy, I think we absolutely have a pretty solid novel and an interesting plot to kind of follow and to sink our teeth into. But the fact that it speaks to this kind of higher order theme that feels kind of really deeply, I don't know, human and tied to our lived life, in the present, that gives it some stakes that feels compelling.
Yeah.
And I think we can take that idea further by considering how individual morality is pitted against collective ethics in these chapters, because I think we see that a number of times. We can take Juliet's journey as a perfect example of this. Clearly, she epitomizes, the valor, the morality, the epicness of pursuing one's personal code and purpose, and ultimately, Yeah, I mean, she obviously is the case for individual liberty. I
Yeah.
mean, she makes it very clear to us that when the mofos are conspiring, you need somebody that's willing
Right.
to put themselves on the line
Right.
and attempt to change the system,
Right.
for the better.
Yeah, she's a woman of action, and
She's a woman
what
of
makes
action.
her so compelling is not only does she leap into action when confronted with a problem,
Yeah.
but she is a person molded by her society,
Yes.
but not constrained by it.
Exactly.
She is willing to break and bend
Exactly.
the rule
Yes.
when she feels necessary,
Totally.
which speaks to
Yes.
her individuality.
Absolutely. But you can also look at what she does as, at least narratively in this novel, leading to the chaos that ends up erupting,
Yeah.
It's ultimately her failure to clean that results in what becomes a fatal uprising.
Right.
And we also have the character of Lucas, who is really quite, he's puzzling, I have to say, because he is, on the one hand, clearly intelligent, clearly in touch with his emotions, as we've seen in these chapters. But he also, at some point, and maybe a little too quickly, but at some point, he does find himself firing on his fellow silo residents, and he's clearly been, for some reason, convinced of the ethical merits of IT's response. And presumably it's rooted in collective survival and the historical precedent. But that tension between control and chaos that we see here is somewhat at the heart of this novel.
Yeah.
And it does seem to me pretty clear what side of this question that Hugh Howey falls on. But nonetheless, I'm enjoying the exploration, in the novel.
too.
And it feels pretty relevant. It doesn't feel like it's dated or timed or overshadowed by some of the things that we find ourselves critical of in the novel.
Yeah.
This, to me, feels like perhaps why we should care, about how this novel plays out.
Yeah.
Because it isn't a question that really ever goes away. There is certainly a balance to be found between these two opposing forces, but we can also see how it's a dynamic equilibrium. It's never quite clearly the case that one side will triumph inevitably and forever. It's kind of the dance between these two things that I think gives rise to the kind of quality of life and experience that I think we would all want to champion.
Right.
We certainly don't want to give up stability by any means, and the social cohesion that we find through the structures that we have in our societies. But on the other hand, obviously, too much control it's life denying,
Right.
It's we will rebel against it
Naturally.
And I think that for me is, again, what has made this such a compelling set of chapters here.
Yeah. Gosh, now you have me firing on all cylinders. What a great takeaway. Man, you said so many beautiful things there. I'm a little awestruck, actually. I hope so. Like, it's so true that at the center of really any human society is this tension of chaos and control, of stability and individuality.
Yes.
Those things aren't always necessarily opposed, but in many cases they are.
Right.
Because in order to be a part of a community, you have to give up some of your individual rights.
Absolutely.
Right? Like walking around naked. I don't know why my mind is going here, but just follow me here. Follow me.
Liberty, baby.
Liberty, like if expressing your individuality means you like to walk around naked in your neighborhood, that is directly opposed to other people in the community wanting a school in the neighborhood or something.
Sure. Right.
That's a weird fucked up example, but I guess it illustrates my point, I guess.
Yes.
Like some level of individuality has to be given up in order to basically agree to a social order.
Yeah.
If you agree to be a part of a society,
Right.
you are buying into laws that society collectively agrees to.
Precisely.
obviously in the Silo, we see that go too far.
Yes.
We see that go into an authoritarian direction that
Right.
takes away liberties.
Yeah.
And I do wish there was a more compelling argument from Bernard or from Bernard's
Yes.
party
Yes.
or from the pact.
Yes.
We are given a lot of Juliet's side and
Totally.
a lot of Knox's side, which
Totally.
is very individualistic.
Yes.
And again, to your point,
Yeah.
like clearly that's kind of where how he leans
Yeah.
in this debate
Yeah.
between how much individualism is too much and how
Right.
much societal stability is too much.
Yeah.
But it's a really fascinating tension.
Totally.
And I think it exists at the core of this story. It exists at the core of all human society. And that's what makes it so easy to relate to.
Yes.
It's a mirror of our own lives that we're
Precisely.
seeing within the Silo.
Yeah.
It's a mirror of this like unspoken thing we all talk about. I mean, sometimes not even unspoken,
Yeah.
right? Like bodily autonomy is a thing that is
Precisely.
politically very charged
Yes.
and in lots of conversations
And timely. Yeah.
and timely.
Yeah.
And that tension exists within this story, as you
Right.
stated.
Right.
And I think that's a really beautiful read on it and makes me appreciate the story even more. Right.
Yeah.
You know, like, despite all my criticisms, there are some of these layers here in the story, and it's
Right.
part of why obviously it resonated with a lot of readers.
Yeah.
And is as famous as it is to this day. What a great takeaway.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, that's it. Hope so. That is our second episode about wool. We are now over the halfway hump of this book. We
That's
have
right.
just the final third to go.
Yeah.
So, dear reader, we have some homework for you, as we always do, for the next episode of Science Fiction Book Club. Make sure that you have read the rest of the book.
The rest of the book, 53 through 82, I
Something-
think. That's quite a lot.
Yeah, but again, short chapters.
Yeah.
Like these chapters were frankly pretty quick to
Yeah.
read, and I believe the rest of the book will be the same. So yeah, we're going to be finishing up the book in our next episode. Read that final third.
Yeah.
I believe it's just part 5. It's just a
Yes.
big chunky part 5, and we're excited to get to the conclusion of this book. So that's your homework. Finish the rest of the book and get ready to talk about Silo Season 2 with us. Of course, if you have questions about the schedule, you're like, what chapters again? When do I read this by? What's going on?
You know where to go.
You know where to go. Check those show notes below. Our full reading schedule for the entire season, including our upcoming books
That's right.
that we'll be getting into after Wool and Silo, are all on that reading schedule for the rest of the season. So you can make sure you get that hold in at the library and read along with us.
That's right. Well, friends, we can't imagine needing someone's permission, like the pact to our girl's father, to be in love with a podcast. So share your love openly and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com.
And of course, you can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, people want continuity. They want to know tomorrow will be a lot like yesterday.
That's right.
They want reassurances.